you had been standing on one of the streets of Jerusalem that day, you really would not have noticed her pass by. There was nothing unusual about her from the throngs of other ladies that were moving through the streets of Jerusalem shopping. Perhaps only one thing about her was that she wasn't carrying a bundle like some of the others had who had already finished some of their shopping. If you had watched her, you had noticed that she is intently looking for something special, for she is going from shop to shop, and she is quickly glancing in the door and looking about the shop, and then moving on down the stone-paved streets to another store. Finally, she turns a corner and comes down a side street, and poking her head inside a door, she seems satisfied that this is the place that she's been looking for. Slipping inside, she now removes the shawl that's been over her head, shrouding most of her physical appearance. If you would have looked at her carefully, you would have noticed a very attractive lady. Very lovely. And yet, if you looked carefully, you would have seen some hard lines in her face. Lines that indicated that there had been a time in her life when everything had not been well. She walks up to the counter, and it's just a plain-looking shop, nothing special. A little bowl with some burning incense in the corner, giving a pungent fragrance to the room, but nothing much. A stout, chubby little man comes to the other side of the counter and says to her, "Good day, madam. Is there something that I can do to help you with?" And she said, "Yes, sir." She said, "I would like to buy some ointment or some perfume." "Oh, madam," he said, "indeed you've come to the right place. I have some of the most fantastic fragrances and ointments from all over the world." And he looked her over very carefully to try and gauge her economic status in life and to know where to start. And he reached under the counter and he pulled out a very nicely finished off plain little wooden box. And he said to her, "Madam," he said, "I think that I have just the right thing for a woman as lovely as you." And he showed her the finely finished little box. And she said to him, well, sir, what's inside?" "Oh," he said, "wait until you catch the fragrance." He said, "Inside this box is the fragrance of crushed rose petals." "Oh," he said, "you know those little roses that grow down in the Vale of Sharon? Oh," he says, "they have been picked at full bloom, when the petals are the most full of fragrant juices, and they're crushed, and the essence of it is in this box. Would you like to smell?" "Oh, yes, sir," she said, "indeed I would." And he picked the box up and he cracked it open for her by her nose, and she took a deep smell, and it was nice. Where she could close her eyes and just dream of being out in a beautiful field full of roses. And she smiled and she said to him, "That's really lovely." She said, how much does that box cost?" "Well, madam," he said, "I tell you, I feel really good today. It's a grand day, and you're such a lovely lady, and certainly this box is just for you. I will let you have this box for only $10. She looked at him, and not even taking the box from him to hold it in her hands, she said, "Do you have something a bit more expensive than that?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, "I certainly do." He had certainly misjudged this woman. And he said, "Just one moment, please." And he took the box and he put it back under the counter. And this time he brought out from underneath a beautiful wooden box that had some beautiful engravings on it, gorgeous engravings. And she looked at it and she reached out and she took her finger and she rubbed it over the engravings, and they were lovely. And she says, "What does it have inside?" "Oh," he says, "if you think the roses were super, wait till you smell this." He says, "It has the fragrance of crushed violets that were plucked at their peak in the spring of this year." And he took the box and he lifted it over towards her nose and he cracked it open. And she was almost intoxicated by the smell of the violets. She could just hear the birds singing in the fields as she smelled it. And she said to him, "Sir," she said, "how much does that box cost?" "Well, ma'am," he said, "I'll tell you, it is a lovely day, like I said before. And it's even better, for my mother-in-law has gone to Jericho today. I tell you," he said, "I will let you have this box. I'll sacrifice it to you today for only $25. And he was delighted as he saw her reach out and take the box and hold it in her hand and look at it. And then she set the box back down on the counter, and she looked at him and she said, "Sir, do you have anything just a bit more expensive than that?" "Oh, yes, ma'am, I do. This one moment." And he took it and he placed it back on the counter shelf. And this time he brought out not a box made out of wood, but a beautiful, beautiful, highly polished brass box. It was lovely. It was polished so highly that if she looked at it, she could see her own reflection in the box. It was a lovely treasure. And he says, "Now, if you think this looks good on the outside, wait till you smell the contents." He said, "There is a little white flower that grows up on the slopes of Mount Hermon." And he says, every spring, as the water begins to come off of the snows and it begins to water the ground below, this little flower blooms. And it is only blooming for one day, and it must be picked that day. And he says, "Wait till you smell the essence of it." And he cracked the box open for her, and she had never smelled anything like that before. She had smelled roses and violets before, but this was new, and she really wanted it. And she said to him, "Sir, how much does it cost?" "Well, ma'am, you must understand, we are reaching up and getting into the more pricey items in my store. And you did ask for something a bit more expensive. I really could not let this go for $100. And he sort of stood back and waited for her, to make a counter offer of, $50. But instead she said to him, "Don't you have something more expensive than that?" "Yes, ma'am, I do." He really had misjudged her by the appearance of her garments. He hadn't expected a day like this. And so he took the brass box and he put it back down on the counter. And you could see that he was thinking for a few moments. And he said, "Would you like to see something really expensive?" "Well," she said, "really expensive is a very relative term, but show me something nicer." And so he excused himself and he went into the back room. And he now comes out of the back room and he has in his hand a beautiful little silver chest. And this little silver chest has a beautiful little gem embedded in the top. Now he said, "Madam, this is not something I usually show to the common run-of-the-mill people that come in here." But he said, "You have persisted, and so I have decided that I would at least show it to you. It's very pricey." And she said, "What does it have in it?" "Well," he said, "Madam," he said, "far away in the land of India, on the banks of the Indus River, there grows a tiny little purple flower with a white throat inside. And it is such a lovely flower, and the fragrance of it is truly the scent of the Far East. Oh, madam, wait till you get a fragrance of this." And he opened it, and as it opened, she could just see the camel caravans coming in from the east with all of their precious jewels and gems and treasures. It was a fantastic box of fragrance. And she took it and she held it in her hand, and it was beautiful, silver. And she said to him, "Sir, how much does this box cost?" "Well, ma'am, U.S. to see something really expensive, and I'm afraid that, perhaps we would not be able to deal over this box, but I would not sell it to anyone for less than $1,000. And his heart skipped a beat as he saw her reach into her coat and feel for her money bag. But then he smiled a knowing smile as she brought her hand back out without it. And she set the box back down on the counter. And she said to him, she said, don't you have something just a bit nicer and more expensive than that? Madam, he said, are you alone? There isn't somebody outside waiting with you. And she said, no, sir. She said, I assure you, I am absolutely alone. Well, he said, madam, I'm not, excuse me, but I'm just not used to this kind of day. Yes, he said, I do have something. And he took his silver box and he disappeared into the back room. And a few moments later, he appeared again. And this time he had a green piece of cloth in his hands. And he sits it down on the counter and he begins to unfold the green cloth. And there on that piece of green cloth, she saw a box made out of pure gold. She had never seen a box like that before. She was almost hesitant and reluctant to reach out and even touch it. But he encouraged her to do so. He said, here, madam, he said, for once in your life, touch something really great. And she reached out and she wouldn't pick up the box itself. She scooped under and picked up the green cloth and held it in the cloth. And he now reached out and he took it and he cracked the box open that she should smell. And she smelled a scent that was totally bewitching. And he said to her, you are now smelling the fragrance of the lotus flower that grows on the banks of the river Nile in Egypt. Oh, he says, truly, this is a gift of a king for a queen. I have shown it to very, very few people. How much does it cost? Well, he said, I tell you what, if a king came in here today and wanted to buy that box from me, I would probably let that box go for $5,000. She set the box back down on the counter as he supposed. And she now reached into her garment and she brought out a leather pouch that was obviously quite stuffed full of coins. He cannot believe his eyes as she begins to pull the strings apart and he sees her now hold it and put her finger in and then she pulls her finger back out, pulls the strings tight and says, don't you have something a bit more expensive than that? Madam, he said, are you really alone? Yes, she said, I assure you that I am. She said, he said, I tell you what. And he came out around the corner and a fat, chubby old fellow went and he looked down the street this way and down the street that way. And finally, he closed the door, picked up a great wooden bar and dropped it into place. And he said, yes, I have one more treasure in my house and I will let you see. It is the sum of my life savings. And it is truly a gift of an emperor for an empress. And he disappeared into the back room. And a few moments later, he reappeared with a piece of purple velvet in his hands. And he very tenderly and gently lays the piece of velvet down on the counter and unfolds it. And there before her eyes is the most delicately carved little alabaster box she has ever seen in her life. It looks so fragile. And she reaches out and she just rubs her finger over the delicate and beautiful carvings and engravings that are all over the box. And she says to him, what does it have inside? Oh, he said, madam, I'm sorry, I cannot let you smell the contents. But it is filled with a fragrance of myrrh. He says it comes from the Chaldees. But he says the box is so designed that once it is opened, it can never be closed again. The box is designed so that when it is opened, it must be crushed open. And all of the contents of this box must be used at once. And therefore, it is a lavish, prodigal gift. And she said to him, "How much would a box like that cost?" "Oh, madam," he said, "as I've already explained, my life savings is tied up in this box. I could not and would not separate myself from this box for anything less than $10,000. And he cannot believe her eyes now as he sees her reopen that leather bag that is in her hand, and he sees golden coins now come out of that bag, and he watches her set them up. 1, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. And finally there are $10,000 worth of coins on that table. And he is speechless as he watches her now reach out and fold the purple velvet over the box, wrap it up, tuck it back inside her garment, and ask that he might open the door, that she might leave. As she moves through the streets of Jerusalem, you would never have guessed the treasure that she had tucked away in her garment. For she is dressed as any lady who was dressed who was going shopping for the day. She slips out through the streets of Jerusalem, out the eastern gate of the city. She now quickly makes the 3-mile journey to Bethany. She comes to her home at Bethany. She slips into her bedroom where she has a very secret place reserved for her treasures. And she goes to that secret place, and Mary of Bethany tucks away a treasure that she has bought for someone that she loves very, very much. Mary has bought this precious gift for Jesus. She has specifically purchased it for Jesus. In the times that Jesus had been at the home, she had heard him speak of the fact that he was going to die soon. And though it made her heart sad and it just broke her up, she wanted so much to have something fit for the man she loved, to be able to anoint his body when he died. And this box was specifically purchased for that. Now, some of you here this evening might be questioning the value of that box. An alabaster box worth $10,000? The Scriptures tell us that the box is worth 300 pence. That's not $10,000. But historians also tell us that the wages for a working man from sunrise to sunset in Jesus' day was 1 pence. That represented 300 working days for a common laboring man. And you figure that out, taking off Sabbaths and Sundays and working 5 days a week, that's a year's wages. And the average man today earns somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 a year. That was a year's wages for a laboring man that was spent on that precious box. You know, it's kind of strange how it was that Mary of Bethany is also Mary Magdalene. She's the same lady. And it's rather strange how Mary Magdalene, or Mary of Magdala, is also Mary of Bethany. For Bethany and Magdala were two little towns that were separated by over 50 miles. And that was a long way in those days. We really don't have a complete narrative story in the Scriptures of how this actually came about. But there are enough pieces of the puzzle here and there that when you begin to take them and piece them together, and the SDA commentary helps us to do this, and it offers a very plausible suggestion of how this came to be. We're told we're told a little bit about the town of Bethany itself. Bethany was a very rich suburb of Jerusalem. Many members of the elite of Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin Council and the rich men and the Pharisees, They didn't like the city living in Jerusalem, and they lived out in the suburbs of Bethany. And we're told that Bethany was a very exclusive little village. And in this village is the home of Lazarus and his two sisters, Martha and Mary. There is also a neighbor in the town, and he is a Pharisee, and his name is Simon. And Simon is a very typical self-righteous, law-doing Pharisee. But he is also a man who notices a very young, beautiful, vivacious Mary who lives down the street. And every day as he sees her walking through the town, he has a growing desire for her himself. And somehow within his own Pharisaic righteousness, there is a spot of iniquity that blossoms in his life. And we don't know exactly how it all worked, but we are informed by the pen of inspiration that this man was the one who was responsible for leading Mary into a horrible life of sin and prostitution. Mary doesn't come home some evenings very early. Matter of fact, she starts coming home later and later in the evenings, and pretty soon people in town, it's a small town, and people begin to talk. Lazarus is in the village one day, and someone says, hey, I noticed your little sister didn't get in until after 1 last night. And Martha is in the village market the next day, and someone says, did you hear where your little sister was last night? And pretty soon the strife in the home is more than they can bear, and the shame and the humiliation. And Mary is asked to leave. And she goes as far away from Bethany as she can go and still be with people that speak her own language. She goes clear from Judea up to Galilee. And she moves into a little town on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, a little town by the name of Magdala. And there she practices the only trade and profession that she knows now. And she becomes a very calloused and hardened woman. So calloused and so hardened that the Scriptures tell us that she actually was possessed by 7 demons. One day, as she is moving through the streets of the city, she noticed that there is a dearth of people. There aren't very many people around, and she says to someone, where is everybody today? Where are they? And someone says, haven't you heard? Everyone has gone up north to the plain of Gennesaret. There is a man who has come down from Capernaum. His name is Jesus. He is Jesus of Capernaum. Jesus had spent so much of his ministry in Capernaum now that at this stage of his life, he was no longer called Jesus of Nazareth, but was called Jesus of Capernaum. And he said, this man, he teaches like no one has ever taught, and he performs miracles. Real miracles. He actually makes blind men see and lame men walk. And she's curious, like everyone else, and she slips out the north end of Magdala, and soon she comes to the great multitude that is gathered around there on the plain of Gennesaret. And as she comes up to the edge of the crowd, she begins moving along the edge of the crowd, sort of, looking for prospective business. When you're in a people profession, you keep your eye out for people. And she's looking over the crowd, but as she is doing so, she finds herself moving farther and farther into the midst of the crowd. And suddenly she hears a voice. A kind voice. A voice filled with authority and yet gentleness at the same time. And she turns and she looks through the heads of the people that are there, and there's a couple of taller men in front of her, and she uses some of her finer attributes to squeeze her way through these men to get to the front of them to see better. And as she does so, she now comes into a place where she can really see Jesus. And she can hardly believe what she is seeing and hearing. She's fascinated. She's never seen a man who looks so totally pure before. Every man that she had ever really seen in life always looked at her with that knowing look and always sizing her up. And And this man, as he is preaching and looks at her, does not look at her that way at all. And she comes closer and closer, and finally she finds herself in the very front. And there is a pause in his teaching, and he turns and he says to her, "Mary, would you like to be made well?" He called her by name. She can't believe. How does he know her name? But she's very uncomfortable by this, and she says, "Made well." She says, "I don't need to be made well, not me." And he says, "Mary, you need to be made well more than you realize." And the Bible tells us that Jesus cast 7 demons out of this woman. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that passage means. I don't know if that means that she was possessed by 7 demons all at once, and that he cast all 7 out. Or could this passage mean that day he cast out the demon of lust from her life, and she went back to Magdala determined in her life that she was going to do better? And she wasn't in town very long before an old friend came by, and she fell again. And she went back to Jesus, and Jesus forgave her again. And she went back into town, and she fell again. And she went back to Jesus, and Jesus forgave her again. Could this passage mean that on 7 different occasions she came to Jesus for healing? And on 7 different occasions she had fallen? Or perhaps it would be only 6 different occasions that she had fallen. I'm not sure exactly what it means. It could mean either. But I know if it was required that she come back to Jesus 7 times, I know that He would have forgiven her every time. If it had been required that she come back to Jesus 50 times, He would have forgiven her and He accepted her in love every single time. And I want to tell you that tells us something about Jesus. That tells us how fantastically in love with us He is. And how much He cares for us. And it doesn't matter how many times you trip and fall. It doesn't matter how many camp meetings or week of prayers or church services that you've been in. And you have given your heart to Him. And you've gone out, and within a few hours or within a few days, it's all over. It's gone. You're back where you were. It doesn't really matter. Because Jesus loves you so much. And He is so understanding that absolutely every time you come back and fall on your knees to Him, Jesus says, "I love you so much. Let me put my robe of righteousness about you, and let's start again." Actually, perhaps I've used a misnomer here or misspoken when I've said that we have to come back to Jesus time after time. Because you see, we never have to come back to Jesus because He's always chasing us. Jesus actually, through the Holy Spirit, is in the work of pursuing us. There's an old Christian classic that was published and written hundreds of years ago. It's called The Hound of Heaven. And perhaps it's sacrilegious, but I don't think in this context it is, to equate God with a dog. God is the hound. And you know how a hound gets on the trail of a rabbit and he follows and follows and follows, and he's not going to give up till he gets that rabbit. And in this great book, God is a hound that gets on our scent. And He follows us and pursues us and keeps after us until He catches us. Until we finally stop running and let Him encircle us with His arms of love and say, "Hey, isn't it time to surrender?" I once heard Elder Robert Whelan preach a sermon on the fact, well, the name of the sermon was that it is easier to be saved than to be lost. And I remember the first time I heard that, I said, "Hey, he hasn't been in the same place as I've been." But as he began to unveil this beautiful truth, how my heart burned within me with joy to realize that we actually have to work at being lost. We actually have to resist the wooings of the Holy Spirit and push Him off. Because one of the most powerful beings of all of the universe is constantly at us, talking to us and wooing us and trying to influence us. And if we would only stop and surrender ourselves to this Holy Spirit, He will transform our lives. He will transform our lives. Not we will transform our lives. Oh, I tell you how Jesus loves us. It is so great, we just can't explain it. Now, after Mary is finally cleansed and healed, when something terrific happens to you, you have to share it with somebody that you love and somebody that you know. And she wants to share this fantastic thing that's happened to her with Lazarus and Martha. And she goes home. And she comes home, and she comes into the house in Bethany, and she says, I'm home. And they said, yes, we see you're home. And she says, no, she says, it's going to be different this time. She says, let me tell you about it. She says, I met this man. And Lazarus said, yes, I know, you've met lots of men. No, she says, it's not that way. She says, I met this man, his name is Jesus, and let me tell you what he has done in my life. I tell you, it is no wonder that Jesus was loved in that household. Jesus had restored unto her femininity. He had given her the grace and the loveliness of a lady again. And she could move within her family with pride again. Self-respect and dignity that God gives to us in our lives. And then of course, Lazarus died. And Jesus came. And now not only has Jesus restored unto Mary her own personhood, but He restores unto her her brother. Oh, I tell you, if there was ever a household where Jesus was loved, it was that household. He was loved there. And He could go there for rest and comfort. And I tell you, if there was ever a woman who loved a man, Mary loved Jesus. She loved Him. He was the first man in life that she had met who didn't want to use her. He treated her with respect and dignity. I'm sure that if there was a fig tree in the backyard, somewhere in that fig tree there must have been carved, M.M. loves J.C. Really. She cared for him deeply. And I really believe that Jesus cared deeply for her. You know, Jesus was a real man. You know, sometimes I think we have questions about perhaps the sexuality of Jesus Christ. But the spirit of prophecy in the Bible are very clear in the fact that Jesus was a 100% total man. I believe that He was a man who had desires like a normal man has. Now, I'm not talking about propensities to lust. Jesus did not have those. Very clear, He had no propensity to lust or evil. But I think that Jesus had a sincere, manly appreciation of the beauty of a woman. As we can have a sincere, honest appreciation of the beauty of a flower. It's beautiful. It's lovely to look at. There is nothing wrong with looking at a lovely lady and genuinely admiring her loveliness and her grace. That is not a sin. The Lord made lovely ladies for us to enjoy looking at, to make the cafeteria a little bit nicer. There's nothing wrong with that. It only becomes wrong when you begin to dwell upon lustful aspects of that beautiful creature. Jesus had to understand, what that is like. We are told He was tempted in all points, such as we. And if He was not tempted in any aspect of His human sexuality, then Jesus Christ cannot understand Roger Bothwell or Mike Jones.
But He does understand because He knows He is our high priest who understands. And when you go to Him on your knees and you say, "Oh, Jesus, I'm having a problem in this area," as our high priest in the heavenly court, He can say, "Hey, I can help you on that because I've been through it." I know. It's great. It is so great to have a real Jesus Christ and not some divine mystical spirit floating around somewhere. He's a real man with real hair and a real beard and real teeth. He knows. And so it is that Jesus is loved in that house. Now, this Simon, we don't want to forget this Simon. The Simon in Bethany who has led Mary into this situation, he had contracted leprosy somewhere along the way. And the Scripture doesn't fulfill all the details or fill in all the details for us on this, but it does tell us that Simon met Jesus and Jesus had cleansed him of his leprosy. And he really appreciated it. But there is one aspect of this, Simon, I can't understand. We are told that even though he appreciated it and he was excited about the fact that Jesus had cleansed him from that living death of leprosy, he still does not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. He is convinced that Jesus is a prophet, that he's a great teacher, that he's a healer. Obviously, he knows that. But he is not convinced that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And he decides that he is going to repay, quotes, get this, he's going to repay Jesus for this fantastic gift of healing. Now, chronologically speaking, we have now come to about 6 days before the crucifixion. It is probably Saturday evening after the sun has gone down, before the fateful Friday. And a great banquet now has been set in Simon's house in honor of Jesus. And it is some kind of banquet that has been put on. I have no doubt about my mind that Martha was the caterer for this banquet. She lived down the street. She was well known for her cooking abilities. And I'm sure she had a great part in this. By the way, being that it was Passover week, millions, literally millions of pilgrims are flowing into Jerusalem. And there is one exciting story that all of the pilgrims hear when they come into Jerusalem. And that is that in a little town 3 miles from here, there was a man who was dead for 3 days. And on the 4th day, he was resurrected again. And he is live, he's flesh, he's walking around down there. And there's also down there the man who did it. And we're told that the spirit and the atmosphere of Jerusalem is just electric. And everyone wants to come to Bethany and see Jesus and Lazarus. And we're told that Saturday evening when the sun went down, the pilgrims began to flow out of the city of Jerusalem down to Bethany. And this was the biggest tourist thing that had ever happened to Bethany. The people are standing outside the city and they're waiting and they're saying, "Hey, would you like to see the man who was dead? Would you like to see the man who raised him?" Yes. Yeah, for just a baksheesh, just a little bit, I will take you to him and show you where he is. And we're told that the people begin to flow in around Simon's house. And now the banquet is going on inside. And Simon, of course, is the host, has the center place. Jesus is at his right hand. Lazarus is sitting at the left hand. And we're told that the door and the windows were just literally jammed with faces, head upon head upon head, looking in, and they're all talking, and the feast is going on. And Mary is sitting in there, and she hears what the people are saying. And the people are talking about making Jesus the king. They're talking about crowning him, and Mary begins to believe that maybe, just maybe, Jesus has misjudged the feelings of the people. Maybe they're not going to kill him like he had supposed. He really is going to be crowned king. Lazarus, my brother, is going to lead into Jerusalem, and he is going to be the king. And she suddenly thinks and realizes that she has in her bedroom a gift for our king. And she slips out of the room now, and she goes home, and she goes into the bedroom, and she gets her little box, and she now comes back into the room, and she is going to be the first to anoint Jesus King of Kings. He was already the King of her life. He had been that for a long time. But this is a very personal thing that she's going to do, a very deeply personal thing. And when you do something deeply personal, you don't like a lot of people watching. And we're told that people at banquets in those days did not sit at a table like we do, but they reclined on couches. And so she gets down low, and she comes in behind the couch, and Jesus' feet is reclining off the back of the couch. And she comes in low so no one can see. She's very quiet. And as she comes close and sits literally at the very feet of Jesus at the back, she is overwhelmed with her feelings of love and emotion for this man. And we're told that she began to weep in sheer joy and love. And tenderly now in her lap, she begins to unfold the piece of purple velvet. And taking it into her hands, she now takes her thumbs and she presses her thumbs down upon that thin, fragile shell, and it smashes open in her hands. And a lovely, effusent cascade of perfume comes rolling out into her hands. And she immediately reaches up and begins to apply it all over his feet. And there's a great excess, and she reaches up and she applies some on the back of his head. And now there is so much, she takes her long hair now and she begins to wipe it up, the excess, and to make his feet just anointed just right. Now she's been very careful to take care of the sight and the sound. She's come in low and quietly, but she's forgotten about people's noses. And pretty soon in the room there are people going, "What's that? Oh, do you smell that? That's wonderful. What is it?" And there's a few connoisseurs in the group who know. And someone finally says, "That's myrrh. Do you realize someone in this room has opened a box of myrrh?" And pretty soon every eye in the room is fixed and fastened upon Mary. And there's utter silence as everyone is watching what she is doing. Judas is the first to speak. He doesn't say it too loud, just loud enough for those around. He says, "Do you realize what that was worth? Do you realize what we could have sold that for? How much we could have helped the poor?" He wasn't real concerned about the poor. He was concerned about Judas. He was the treasurer for the group. We're told that he systematically would pay himself out of the treasury chest, for his executive ability. We're told that Jesus considered him to be a thief. Jesus has never openly talked to Judas about his problem. He's told a lot of parables about wealth and honesty and stewardship, and we're told that he always directed them in Judas's direction, but he never openly would rebuke Judas, lest he give Judas an open excuse for what will happen later. But everybody in the room now begins to pick this up. Boy, what an extravagant waste. And I don't think there's anything that hurts you more than when you have done something out of real personal love reasons and somebody ridicules you for it. I mean, here she was. She was pouring out her total emotions and love for this. And now she's suddenly ridiculed for this. And she's deeply embarrassed and hurt. And if there's a hole in the floor, she wishes it would just open up and swallow her. And she's quickly picking up the pieces of the alabaster box and putting them in the cloth and wrapping them up. And she just wants to get out of there. And Jesus looks down and he sees how deeply hurt she is. And Jesus can't stand it that she's been hurt this way. He can't stand it when any of his children are hurt. And he finally turned and he said in the direction of Judas, and this is the first time he ever spoke so sternly to Judas, but he said, "Leave her alone." He says, "I tell you this, wherever the story of the gospel is told, the story of what this woman has done for me will be told and retold and retold." Both Matthew and Mark both record that verse, that saying in Jesus, that this story would be told and retold. And I'll never forget the first time I read that verse, and as I did so, I thought to myself, why? Why is this story so important that it must be told and retold every time the gospel story is told? Why is it that important? It's a sweet story. It's a nice story. But why is it that important? And so I did what we're directed to do when we lack wisdom. James tells us, if we lack wisdom, let us ask of God, and He will give it to us. And I can remember one day in my study, I knelt my head over my Bible and I said, oh God, I really would like to know what's with this story. Why is it so important? And I must confess to you that I did not have a blinding revelation. The scroll didn't drop open in front of me, and there was the answer. I didn't hear a voice out of thunder. Because you see, God speaks to us in the still, small voice. And as we continue to study, He continues to open up to us. And very quietly and gently, God did answer my prayer. And I believe with all of my heart that this story is important because it is a symbol of the entire story of redemption itself. When mankind needed a gift of love, God looked over heaven and He poured out of heaven all love itself. As Mary had purchased the most expensive box that she could find and afford, God looked over heaven, and for the redemption of mankind, He finds the most precious, the most expensive, the most valuable thing in the universe there is, His only Son. And He now will give His only Son to us. And as that precious box was broken open, so was the precious body of Jesus Christ broken open. And as the precious blood of Jesus Christ flows out of His body for our redemption, so that precious myrrh flowed out of that broken box for us. And as there was an access of love poured out on Calvary, because there was enough love poured out on Calvary for the redemption of every human being, how much of it is going to be wasted? How many billions and billions of people in this earth are never going to be saved because they will never use the grace that is poured out at the cross? And so it was that there was an excess of myrrh, too much myrrh poured out from that box. That little alabaster box is a beautiful symbol of God's gift to us in the form of Jesus Christ. I tell you, God cared enough to send the very best. And the very best was Jesus Christ. Oh, how He loves us so. Oh, how He loved Mary. And oh, how He loved this man Simon who is sitting on His right hand. He's longing and waiting for some way to get through to this Simon. And now Simon, he is very embarrassed that Mary is here and doing this thing. Mary is a chapter in his life he would like not to remember. And he thinks to himself, surely this man is not a prophet. Surely if this man was a prophet, he would know what kind of a woman this is that's touching him, and he wouldn't allow that. And we're told that very gently now, Jesus turns over so that no one else can hear, and He whispers in his ear. And He says, Simon, He says, there once was a man who had two other individuals who owed him money. One of them owed him $50, one of them owed him $500. And finally the day came when the notes were due. And he said both men came to him and they couldn't pay. And out of graciousness, this man, instead of sending them off to debtor's prison, this man forgave both of them their debts. And said that neither of them would ever have to pay back the 50 or the 500. Now Simon, he said, who do you think loved the creditor the most? Oh, Simon said, Lord, obviously the one who was forgiven the most. And as he says that, he's looking in Jesus' eyes, and Jesus nods to him. And it all comes to him. It all unfolds. He was the greater debtor. He was the one that was responsible. Mary was only the one who owed 50. He was the one who had owed 500. And he suddenly realizes that Jesus had been reading his mind. And oh, how tenderly and gently Jesus had dealt with him. And we're told at that moment, in that spot, Simon the Pharisee finally breaks down and surrenders and says, "Oh, Jesus, I understand. I truly believe." Fantastic, isn't it? How tender Jesus is. He's never harsh. He's never cruel and vindictive. He's tender to Mary. He's tender to Simon. He genuinely cares. That's not the end of the story of Mary. It is now a week later. It is Sunday morning. Mary is shattered. Jesus is dead. She had been convinced that he wasn't going to die, and now Jesus is dead. He's in the tomb, and she had used her alabaster box, the precious box that she had bought to anoint him in death. It is gone. And she didn't have anything. And certainly that Sabbath evening, after the sun had finally gone down, Saturday night, she must have gone and with the remaining money she had, purchased something. I really don't know how she ever figured she was going to do it on Sunday morning. How she ever was going to get in the tomb. The stone had been rolled, the seal was on, the soldiers were there, but she was going to come anyway. And as she comes and she gets there, the stone is gone, the soldiers are gone, and the tomb is empty. And she was one shattered lady. Not only did they have the indecency and the horror to kill him, but they have actually gone so far as to steal his body from them. And she can't believe it, and she falls down, and she begins to weep, and she begins to cry. And someone comes up behind her. And he says, "Madam, why are you crying?" "Oh, sir," she said, they've taken him. Don't you know where they've taken him? Please, sir, tell me." And oh, how her heart must have skipped 20 beats. Oh, how the little hairs must have stood erect on the back of her neck as he said to her in a very familiar voice, "Hey, Mary." Oh, wow. Through the bleariness of her tear-filled eyes, she is up and she falls down and she throws her arms around him and she hangs on. You see, the King James Version says, Jesus said to her, "Touch me not." But if you'll check many, many other translations on this passage, and you'll check the original Greek on this, you will soon discover that that isn't really what Jesus said. Jesus said to her, "Mary, you're going to have to let me go now. I haven't been to my Father yet." Jesus never is the "don't touch me." Jesus is always available for us to reach out and touch. Jesus is always reaching out and touching us. Never think that Jesus is the untouchable. There was nothing physically wrong with him that she couldn't touch him. She was. She was so in love and so relieved and so filled with joy that she had her arms around him and she was hanging on. And finally he says to her, "Mary, you've got to let go now. I haven't been to my Father. I've got to go." And I think that is something. That is really something, that he hadn't been to his Father yet. Do you realize how anxious Jesus and the Father must have been for a reunion? Well, I tell you, all of the choirs from all over the universe must have streamed in for this occasion. Their Lord, their Creator, the one who was the most important thing in their life, he was alive again. And I tell you, the corridor from earth to the Father's throne must have been lined that morning with choir after choir after choir from all of the galaxies of the universe. And they all must have had their own anthem to sing of praise and hallelujah that they had been practicing for. And while the whole universe now is waiting, Jesus understands that there is one human being on this earth who needed him, and needed him badly. And it was Mary. And Jesus puts his hand up and he says to the whole universe, wait! There is someone here who needs me before I will come. And Jesus slipped into that garden and came to Mary to fulfill her needs. And after her needs were taken care of. Oh, listen. There is a text, there is a sentence in the Spirit of Prophecy that just lights my fire. It says that the God above the choirs and the anthems and the orchestras of heaven hears the feeblest prayer of the weakest saint when he cries out for love and help. I tell you, I love Jesus so much. He really cares. He really cares about plain, old, ordinary human beings. Plain, old, non-important me and you. He really, really cares. And no matter what's going on in the universe, when you cry out for his attention, you better believe you've got it. There's a commercial that's been running on television recently. It says, you ask for it, you got it. Well, you ask for Jesus' attention, you've got it. Just like that. I love him so tonight. Would you sing with me again tonight? My Jesus, I love thee, I know thou art mine.
You have been listening to another special American Christian Ministries presentation. International copyright, all rights reserved. Free listening of this message and over 7,000 other presentations by more than 100 speakers on 50 different topics is now available on our American Christian Ministries mobile app for Android and Apple devices and on our secure website. You may also order presentations online at AmericanChristianMinistries.org or call 800-233-4450. Your prayers and continued financial support are very important to ensure the continuation of this ministry as we help to prepare America and the world to meet Jesus Christ. He's coming soon.